Today I invite you to pause for a moment and look beyond what your eyes can see. Many people work hard to build a house, decorate it beautifully, and fill it with comfort, yet still wonder why peace feels absent, why joy seems fragile, or why tension quietly lingers within their walls. This is because a home is more than wood and stone. A home carries an atmosphere. It breathes, it speaks, and it responds to what we allow inside it. We often think darkness enters loudly through crisis, tragedy, or open rebellion. But in truth, darkness is far more patient. It enters quietly, subtly, through things we consider harmless, ordinary, or insignificant. Not everything that is common is clean. Not everything that is attractive is life-giving. And not everything we own is neutral in the spiritual realm. You see, light does not compete with darkness. Light replaces it, but light must be welcomed. When we unknowingly hold on to objects, symbols, or practices that carry the wrong influence, we are not losing a battle, we are giving permission. And what is permitted will eventually manifest. This is why some homes feel heavy, some feel restless, and others feel full of peace, even in the midst of difficulty. Today is not about fear. It is not about judgment. And it is certainly not about superstition. This is about awareness. This is about reclaiming the spiritual authority entrusted to you. Your home was never meant to be a place of confusion, oppression, or silent struggle. It was meant to be a sanctuary, a place where peace rests on the walls, where love flows freely, and where light governs every corner. When alignment changes, atmosphere changes. When atmospheres changes, lives change. And sometimes, transformation does not begin with prayer alone, but with removal. When what invites darkness is taken away, light does not need to be forced. It naturally fills the space. So today, open your heart. Listen carefully, because what you are about to hear may seem simple, but it carries the power to restore peace, protect your household, and realign your home with the purpose it was created for. The unseen, spiritual atmosphere of a home is something many people sense but struggle to explain. You can walk into one house and immediately feel calm, safe, and welcomed, even if the furniture is simple and the space is small. You can enter another house, beautifully designed and filled with expensive things, yet feel uneasy, heavy, or restless without knowing why. This difference is not accidental. Every home carries an atmosphere shaped by what is allowed to remain, what is practiced repeatedly, and what is silently tolerated. Just as air can be fresh or polluted, the spiritual environment of a home can be life-giving or draining, uplifting or oppressive. A home is not only a physical shelter. It is a living space where thoughts are formed, emotions are released, words are spoken, and habits are reinforced. Over time, these elements blend together and create an invisible climate that affects everyone who lives there. Arguments do not disappear when voices fall silent, and peace does not automatically arrive because a house is quiet. Emotional residue lingers, intentions settle into the walls, and repeated behaviors shape the tone of daily life. This is why some homes feel warm even when no one is speaking, while others feel tense even during moments of laughter. Objects, symbols, and images play a powerful role in shaping this atmosphere because they are never just neutral. Everything placed inside a home carries meaning, memory, or influence. Some items remind us of gratitude, faith, love, and hope. Others are connected to fear, obsession, darkness, pride, or despair. When an object repeatedly draws the mind toward negativity, violence, immorality, or hopelessness, it quietly reinforces those ideas. Over time, the mind becomes accustomed to their presence, and the heart becomes less sensitive to their influence. What once felt uncomfortable slowly begins to feel normal. The unseen atmosphere of a home is also shaped by intention. When a family intentionally fills their space with kindness, forgiveness, prayer, and gratitude, the home begins to reflect those values. When bitterness, resentment, uncontrolled anger, or constant complaint are left unchecked, the home absorbs them. Children often sense this before adults do. They may not have words for it, but they respond to the atmosphere through anxiety, withdrawal, aggression, or fear. Adults, on the other hand, often explain away their discomfort as stress or fatigue, never realizing that the environment itself is contributing to their emotional state. Another important aspect of spiritual atmosphere is repetition. What is done once may have little effect, but what is repeated becomes embedded. Repeated words create patterns of thinking. Repeated actions form habits. Repeated exposure shapes desires. When certain influences are present day after day, they slowly mold the emotional and spiritual tone of the home. This is why small, seemingly insignificant choices matter far more than people realize. A home does not suddenly become heavy or dark overnight. It changes gradually through repeated permission rather than sudden invasion. The unseen atmosphere also responds to alignment. When a home is aligned with values that promote peace, respect, and purpose, it feels ordered and safe. When it is misaligned, confusion and unrest increase. This misalignment can come from unresolved conflict, hidden guilt, unspoken pain, or objects that represent beliefs and practices contrary to the values the family claims to hold. Even when people verbally express good intentions, the atmosphere responds more strongly to what is practiced and displayed than to what is spoken. Many people try to fix the atmosphere of their home by changing circumstances instead of addressing influences. They move to a new place, buy new furniture, repaint the walls, or invest in entertainment, yet the heaviness remains. This is because atmosphere is not primarily about location or appearance. It is about what is allowed to occupy space emotionally and spiritually. When the root remains untouched, the symptoms simply relocate. The unseen atmosphere of a home also affects clarity of thought and emotional resilience. In a healthy environment, people think more clearly, communicate more gently, and recover more quickly from stress. In a heavy environment, misunderstandings increase, patience shortens, and small problems feel overwhelming. This is not because people suddenly change, but because the environment constantly presses on their emotions and reactions. Over time, this pressure can shape personality, relationships, and even decision-making. Restoring a healthy atmosphere does not require fear or extreme measures. It begins with awareness and honesty. When people pause to evaluate what they allow into their home, they regain authority over their environment. Removing negative influences is not about loss. It is about making room. When what drains peace is taken away, peace does not need to be forced. It naturally fills the space that has been cleared. The unseen atmosphere of a home responds quickly to intentional change. When harmful objects are removed, when words become kinder, when forgiveness replaces resentment, and when values are lived consistently, the environment begins to shift. People often notice improved sleep, calmer conversations, and a renewed sense of safety without being able to explain why. This is because atmosphere changes first and behavior follows. A home was never meant to be a place of quiet struggle or hidden heaviness. It was meant to be a refuge, a place where strength is restored and hearts are protected. When people understand that their home carries an unseen spiritual climate, they stop living passively and begin living intentionally. They recognize that peace is not only something to be desired, but something to be guarded, cultivated, and maintained. And when this awareness takes root, the home itself begins to breathe differently, carrying warmth instead of weight, clarity instead of confusion, and light that gently fills every corner without resistance. The idea that physical objects can influence spiritual sensitivity may sound abstract at first, yet it is deeply connected to how human awareness works. People are not only shaped by thoughts and emotions, but also by what constantly surrounds them. The eyes take in images before the mind evaluates them, and the heart often responds before logic intervenes. Objects quietly communicate messages, values, and moods, and over time, these messages shape perception, sensitivity, and inner awareness. This influence happens gradually, not through dramatic moments, but through repeated exposure that trains the inner life to respond in certain ways. Every object carries a story. Some stories uplift, while others subtly pull the heart toward heaviness or distraction. A photograph can awaken gratitude or regret. An image can inspire hope or normalize darkness. Decorative items, symbols, artworks, and even everyday tools can either sharpen inner sensitivity or dull it. When the environment is filled with objects that glorify peace, beauty, discipline, and meaning, the inner senses remain alert and responsive. When the environment is cluttered with items connected to fear, aggression, obsession, or despair, the inner awareness slowly becomes numb. This numbness does not feel like darkness at first. It feels like normality. Spiritual sensitivity is closely tied to attention. What a person repeatedly looks at becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar begins to feel acceptable. Objects that once felt disturbing can lose their impact through constant exposure. This desensitization weakens the inner warning system that helps people recognize when something is out of alignment. Over time, the heart becomes less responsive, not because it is hardened intentionally, but because it has been trained to overlook subtle signals. Physical surroundings play a major role in this training process. Objects also influence emotional states, and emotions strongly affect spiritual perception. A space filled with chaotic clutter often produces mental noise and restlessness. A space dominated by aggressive imagery can increase irritation or anxiety. A space that reflects harmony and intention encourages calmness and clarity. When emotions are constantly stirred or unsettled by the environment, it becomes harder to listen inwardly, reflect deeply, or remain spiritually alert. Sensitivity requires stillness, and stillness is difficult to maintain in an environment that continuously provokes the senses. Another important factor is symbolism. Human beings naturally respond to symbols, even when they claim not to. Symbols bypass rational filters and speak directly to the subconscious. Objects associated with darkness, violence, or destructive themes do not remain passive decorations. They repeatedly reinforce certain ideas and emotional tones. Even if a person insists they are unaffected, the subconscious continues to absorb the message. Over time, this can distort values, weaken discernment, and reduce sensitivity to what is life-giving. Objects can also anchor memories. Items connected to painful experiences, unresolved relationships, or unhealthy phases of life can keep the heart tied to the past. Every time the object is seen, the memory is subtly reactivated, even if consciously ignored. This constant activation drains emotional energy and reduces spiritual clarity. Sensitivity thrives in environments that support healing and release, not in spaces that continually reopen old wounds. The influence of objects becomes even stronger through repetition and placement. An item placed in a prominent location speaks louder than one tucked away. Objects encounter daily shape habits of thought more powerfully than those seen occasionally. What is placed in bedrooms, living rooms, and personal spaces has a deeper impact than what is stored out of sight. These are the places where the mind rests and the heart opens. When negative or distracting influences occupy these spaces, they interfere with rest, reflection, and inner alignment. Children are especially affected by physical surroundings. Their sensitivity is naturally high, and they absorb environmental cues without filters. Objects that normalize fear, confusion, or aggression can shape their emotional responses and expectations of the world. They may grow accustomed to certain influences without ever questioning them, carrying these patterns into adulthood. What adults tolerate as decoration or entertainment may quietly shape a child's inner world and sensitivity for years to come. Spiritual sensitivity is also connected to order and intention. When objects are chosen thoughtfully, the environment communicates purpose and care. When items are accumulated without reflection, the space can become spiritually noisy. Noise does not always mean sound. It can be visual, emotional, or symbolic. Too many conflicting messages compete for attention, making it harder for the inner voice to be heard. Sensitivity requires simplicity, not excess. Removing certain objects does not weaken a person, it strengthens awareness. When unnecessary or harmful influences are removed, the inner senses often become sharper almost immediately. People report feeling lighter, calmer, and more focused without fully understanding why. This is because sensitivity responds quickly when interference is reduced. Just as eyes adjust to light when darkness is removed, the inner awareness adjusts when negative influences are taken away. Physical objects do not control people, but they do participate in shaping the environment that shapes people. Sensitivity is not lost suddenly. It fades when constantly surrounded by influences that dull it. Restoring sensitivity does not require dramatic change, but intentional change. When people choose what surrounds them with care, their inner awareness becomes clearer, more responsive, and more aligned. The environment begins to support clarity instead of confusion, and the heart becomes more capable of recognizing what brings life and what quietly drains it. A home functions as more than a physical shelter. It acts as a gateway through which emotional, relational, and spiritual influences either enter freely or are quietly resisted. Every home stands at a threshold, constantly receiving and transmitting what is permitted within its boundaries. Peace and conflict do not arrive randomly. They respond to what is welcomed, nurtured, and protected. When a home becomes a gateway of peace, it offers safety, clarity, and restoration. When it becomes a gateway of conflict, tension, confusion, and unrest find easy access, often without obvious cause. A gateway is defined by access and authority. Whoever controls the gateway determines what comes in and what stays out. In the same way, the condition of a home is shaped by the authority exercised within it. Words spoken repeatedly, attitudes practiced daily, and behaviors left unchallenged all function as permissions. Peace does not merely exist because people desire it. It exists where it is actively guarded. Conflict does not always erupt suddenly. It often enters quietly through unresolved resentment, careless speech, or tolerated negativity until it becomes part of the environment. Homes that function as gateways of peace are not free from problems, but they process problems differently. Disagreements do not linger as bitterness. Stress does not dominate the emotional climate. Even during difficult seasons, there is an underlying sense of safety and order. This does not happen by chance. It happens when respect governs communication, when forgiveness is practiced rather than postponed, and when unity is valued over ego. These qualities act like filters at the gateway, allowing challenges to enter without allowing them to rule. On the other hand, when a home becomes a gateway of conflict, even small issues can escalate quickly. Conversations feel tense. Misunderstandings multiply. Silence becomes heavy rather than restful. People may feel constantly on edge without knowing why. This happens when the gateway is left unguarded. Harsh words pass freely. Anger is normalized. Disrespect is excused. Over time, the home absorbs these patterns, and they begin to define the atmosphere more than the people themselves. The role of consistency is crucial in determining which gateway a home becomes. Occasional kindness cannot override habitual criticism. Sporadic calm cannot counter daily chaos. What is practiced most frequently becomes dominant. When patience, gratitude, and self-control are consistently exercised, they establish authority at the gateway. When complaint, sarcasm, and emotional withdrawal become routine, they open the door to unrest. The environment responds not to intentions, but to patterns. Relationships within the home are the primary carriers of this influence. How people speak to one another matters deeply. Words are not just sounds, they carry emotional and spiritual weight. Encouraging words strengthen the gateway of peace. Condemning or dismissive words weaken it. Even words spoken in private shape the environment because they influence attitudes and behaviors that later surface in interaction. A home hears everything, even when people think it does not. Boundaries also determine whether a home invites peace or conflict. Boundaries are not walls meant to isolate, but gates meant to protect. Healthy boundaries regulate behavior, manage expectations, and preserve respect. When boundaries are absent, confusion increases. Roles blur. Responsibility becomes unclear. Resentment grows. Conflict thrives in spaces where limits are undefined. Peace flourishes where boundaries are honored and maintained. The emotional health of individuals within the home also affects the gateway. Unresolved pain, hidden guilt, and suppressed anger do not remain contained. They leak into interactions, tone, and reactions. When inner conflicts are ignored, they eventually manifest as external conflict. Homes that function as gateways of peace create space for honesty, healing, and growth. Homes that function as gateways of conflict often avoid deeper issues, allowing them to fester beneath the surface. External influences further shape the gateway. What is regularly brought into the home through media, conversations, and activities either strengthens peace or fuels unrest. Constant exposure to aggression, negativity, or chaos trains the environment to mirror those qualities. Conversely, exposure to content that promotes wisdom, compassion, and hope reinforces calm and clarity. The gateway does not discriminate. It allows in whatever is consistently invited. Leadership within the home plays a decisive role. Leadership is not about control but responsibility. When those with influence model humility, accountability, and calmness, the environment follows. When leaders react impulsively, avoid responsibility, or fuel division, conflict gains authority. A home reflects the tone set by those who guide it, whether intentionally or unconsciously. Choosing peace at the gateway does not mean suppressing truth or avoiding difficult conversations. It means addressing issues with maturity rather than hostility. Conflict becomes destructive not because problems exist, but because they are handled without respect or patience. A peaceful gateway allows truth to enter without allowing chaos to dominate. It creates space for growth rather than fear. Every home is continually becoming something. It is never neutral. Each day, through countless small choices, it moves closer to being a gateway of peace or a gateway of conflict. Awareness restores authority. When people recognize their role in shaping the gateway, they regain the ability to change it. Peace does not need to be chased. It needs to be protected. Conflict does not need to be feared. It needs to be denied permission. When this understanding settles in, the home begins to shift naturally, responding to intention, consistency, and care, and over time the gateway reflects what has been most faithfully guarded and most deeply valued. The silent invitation we give through what we tolerate is one of the most overlooked forces shaping the atmosphere of a home and a life. Tolerance is often mistaken for patience, wisdom, or peacekeeping, yet tolerance is not neutral. Whatever is tolerated is quietly endorsed, even when it is verbally opposed. The environment responds more to what is allowed to remain than to what is occasionally criticized. Over time, tolerated behaviors, attitudes, and objects establish authority, not because they are strong, but because they are unchallenged. Tolerance works quietly. It does not announce itself or demand attention. It settles in through small compromises that seem harmless at first. A negative habit that is ignored becomes routine. A harmful influence that is excused becomes familiar. An unhealthy pattern that is postponed becomes permanent. People often believe that silence equals control, but silence frequently equals permission. What is not confronted does not disappear. It takes root and grows comfortable. The danger of tolerance lies in its gradual nature. Rarely does someone wake up and intentionally invite disorder, heaviness, or confusion into their home. Instead, they overlook small things because addressing them feels inconvenient, uncomfortable, or unnecessary. A sharp word is dismissed as stress. A recurring behavior is justified as personality. An object with negative influence is kept because it was expensive, sentimental, or socially acceptable. Each decision seems minor, yet together they shape the direction of the environment. Tolerance also dulls discernment. When something is first introduced that does not belong, it often feels uncomfortable. There is an inner signal that something is off. But when that signal is ignored repeatedly, sensitivity weakens. What once felt wrong begins to feel normal. This normalization is one of the most powerful effects of tolerance. Once something feels normal, it no longer raises questions. And when questions stop, change stops. What we tolerate teaches others what is acceptable. In shared spaces, tolerance becomes instruction. Children learn quickly what truly matters, not by what is spoken, but by what is allowed. If disrespect is tolerated, respect loses value. If anger is excused, calm becomes optional. If harmful influences are left unchallenged, they become part of the culture of the home. Even adults unconsciously adjust their behavior to match what the environment permits. Tolerance also affects internal boundaries. When people repeatedly tolerate what they know is unhealthy, they begin to compromise their own standards. This creates inner conflict because actions no longer align with values. Over time, this misalignment produces discomfort, frustration, and confusion. People may feel restless or dissatisfied without understanding why. The environment mirrors this inner conflict, reinforcing it instead of resolving it. There is also a difference between patience and tolerance that is often misunderstood. Patience is intentional and purposeful. It allows time for growth. A tolerated object affects mood and focus. Over time, these influences interact with one another, creating a larger pattern that is harder to change. This is why environments that feel heavy often did not become that way through one major event, but through many small allowances made over time. Tolerance can also be driven by fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being misunderstood, fear of appearing strict, or fear of letting go can all lead to inaction. Yet fear-based tolerance ultimately produces the very discomfort people are trying to avoid. When boundaries are not set early, stronger measures are often required later. Addressing issues while they are small preserves peace far more effectively than ignoring them until they grow. The silent invitation of tolerance operates whether we acknowledge it or not. Environments are always responding. They do not wait for clarity or intention. They are shaped daily by what is confronted and what is ignored. When negative influences are tolerated, they assume they belong. When they are addressed, they lose their authority quickly. The shift often happens faster than expected because many influences rely on silence to survive. Removing tolerance does not mean becoming harsh or controlling. It means becoming intentional. It means aligning actions with values and allowing the environment to reflect that alignment. When people decide that certain influences no longer belong, they reclaim authority over their space. This decision alone often brings a sense of relief, clarity, and renewed strength. Tolerance is powerful not because it is aggressive, but because it is passive. It allows environments to drift instead of being guided. When people become aware of what they have been tolerating, they often realize that change does not require force, only decision. Once permission is withdrawn, many influences lose their grip naturally. The environment begins to adjust, responding to the new boundaries that have been set. What we tolerate today shapes what we struggle with tomorrow. What we confront today shapes what we enjoy tomorrow. Homes, like hearts, respond to leadership. When leadership is exercised through clarity and care, peace becomes sustainable. When leadership is replaced by avoidance, conflict finds room to grow. Awareness breaks the cycle of silent invitation. Once people understand that tolerance is a form of permission, they begin to choose more carefully what they allow to remain, and that choice alone begins to transform the atmosphere in ways that feel both immediate and lasting. The difference between possession and permission is subtle, yet it carries profound consequences for how a home, a mind, and a life are shaped. Many people believe influence only begins when something is actively embraced or intentionally invited, but influence often begins much earlier, at the moment permission is granted. Possession implies ownership, control, or conscious acceptance. Permission, however, can exist without ownership, agreement, or even awareness. This is why people are sometimes affected by things they claim not to believe in, support, or value. Influence does not require possession. It only requires access. Possession is deliberate. It involves choice, attachment, and identification. When someone possesses something, they acknowledge it as theirs, defend it, and often invest in it. Permission, on the other hand, can be passive. It is often granted through silence, tolerance, or neglect rather than decision. A person may say, "I don't agree with this," yet still allow it to remain. That allowance is permission, and permission carries authority. What is permitted assumes it belongs, even if it is never embraced. Many misunderstand this distinction and assume that as long as they do not personally engage, believe, or participate, they are unaffected. Yet environments do not respond to beliefs alone. They respond to boundaries. Boundaries define permission. When boundaries are unclear or unenforced, access is granted. This is why something unwanted can influence a space even when no one actively supports it. Permission does not ask for agreement. It only asks for room. Permission often begins with small compromises. Something is allowed because it seems harmless, temporary, or insignificant. There is an assumption that control remains intact because possession has not occurred. But over time, what is permitted becomes familiar, and what becomes familiar gains influence. Familiarity lowers resistance. Resistance is not lost through surrender, but through comfort. Once comfort replaces caution, permission deepens. The power of permission is revealed in its cumulative effect. One tolerated influence may seem minor, but multiple permissions create an environment where influence multiplies. This is why people sometimes feel overwhelmed without a clear cause. Nothing dramatic has happened, yet something feels wrong. The issue is rarely sudden possession. It is accumulated permission. Each allowance builds upon the last until the environment reflects what has been most consistently permitted it. Perpensa also operates internally. A person may not possess certain attitudes or behaviors intentionally, yet still allow them space through unchallenged thoughts, repeated excuses, or unresolved patterns. Over time, these internal permissions shape reactions, decisions, and emotional responses. The individual may say, "This is not who I am," yet still experience the consequences of what has been allowed to remain. Identity is shaped not only by what we claim, but by what we permit to influence us repeatedly. In shared spaces, permission becomes collective. When one person tolerates something, it often signals acceptance to others. Silence is interpreted as agreement. In this way, permission spreads without conversation. A behavior, object, or attitude that might have been questioned initially becomes normalized because no one addresses it. Over time, questioning feels unnecessary or even disruptive, not because the influence is healthy, but because permission has already been established. But possession is especially powerful because it does not feel threatening. Possession feels obvious and demands attention. Permission feels quiet and reasonable. It disguises itself as patience, open-mindedness, or flexibility. Yet flexibility without boundaries becomes vulnerability. An open door without discernment does not protect what is inside. Permission determines what passes through the door, not intention. The difference between possession and permission also explains why removal is often more effective than confrontation. When possession exists, conflict may be required. When permission exists, clarity is often enough. Simply withdrawing permission can cause an influence to lose its hold. Many influences rely entirely on access, not force. Once access is denied, their impact weakens quickly. People often underestimate their authority in this area. They assume influence is stronger than it is. In reality, many influences persist only because permission remains unchallenged. Once a person decides that something no longer belongs, the environment responds. This decision does not require anger or fear, only resolve. Authority is exercised not through struggle, but through boundaries. Understanding this difference also restores responsibility without blame. People are not always responsible for what enters their environment, but they are responsible for what stays. Something may arrive uninvited, but it remains only if permission is granted. This understanding empowers change without shame. It shifts focus from regret to action. Prevention shapes atmosphere long before possession shapes behavior. By the time possession becomes visible, permission has already done its work. This is why awareness at the level of permission is so important. Addressing influences early prevents deeper entanglement later. It preserves clarity, peace, and alignment without requiring dramatic intervention. When people recognize the difference between possession and permission, they stop asking whether something is overtly harmful and start asking whether it truly belongs. This question alone transforms decision-making. Belonging is not determined by popularity, cost, or convenience, but by alignment. What aligns strengthens, what does not align drains, even if it is never fully embraced. Possession is a quiet agreement with presence. Possession is a declared relationship. Many struggles persist not because people have chosen them, but because they have allowed them space without realizing the authority that allowance carries. Once permission is withdrawn, influence loses ground. The environment begins to shift, not through force, but through order, as boundaries quietly reassert themselves, and space is reclaimed with intention and clarity. Spiritual discernment in everyday living is not reserved for rare moments of crisis or dramatic decisions. It is exercised quietly in ordinary choices, daily reactions, and subtle judgments that shape direction over time. Discernment is the inner ability to recognize what aligns with life, peace, and purpose versus what quietly drains, distracts, or distorts. It is not driven by fear or suspicion, but by clarity and sensitivity. When discernment is active, people navigate life with awareness rather than impulse, intention rather than habit, and wisdom rather than reaction. Everyday life constantly presents influences competing for attention. Conversations, media, objects, routines, and relationships all carry messages, some obvious and others subtle. Discernment functions like an inner filter, helping a person recognize not only what is right or wrong, but what is appropriate, timely, and beneficial. Without discernment, people may make choices that seem harmless, yet gradually lead them away from peace. With discernment, even small decisions are guided by alignment rather than convenience. Discernment grows through attentiveness. When people slow down enough to notice how certain things affect their inner state, clarity increases. Some environments bring calm, others bring agitation. Some interactions leave a person strengthened, others leave them drained. Discernment does not judge these experiences harshly, it observes them honestly. Over time, this awareness sharpens the ability to choose what nurtures life and to step away from what undermines it. In everyday living, discernment often speaks quietly rather than loudly. It may appear as a gentle hesitation, an inner discomfort, or a sense of unease that does not have an immediate explanation. Many people override these signals because they trust logic, habit, or external pressure more than inner awareness. Yet discernment is rarely dramatic. It does not shout. It waits to be respected. When ignored repeatedly, it grows quieter. When honored consistently, it becomes clearer and more reliable. Discernment also requires humility. It involves admitting that not everything attractive is beneficial, and not everything familiar is safe. People often confuse comfort with correctness. Discernment challenges this assumption by asking deeper questions. Does this bring peace or restlessness? Does this strengthen clarity or increase confusion? Does this align with values or quietly erode them? These questions guide everyday decisions in ways that prevent long-term regret. One of the greatest challenges to discernment is busyness. When life moves too fast, choices are made automatically. Reactions replace reflection. In such conditions, discernment has little room to operate. Stillness creates space for inner clarity. Even brief moments of pause allow awareness to surface. Discernment does not require hours of solitude. It requires moments of honesty. A single pause before a decision can change its outcome. Discernment is also shaped by what is consistently practiced. Just as muscles strengthen through use, discernment sharpens through exercise. When people regularly reflect on their choices and their effects, clarity increases. When reflection is avoided, discernment weakens. Over time, people may lose touch with their inner guidance and rely entirely on external cues. This often leads to dissatisfaction, even when life appears successful on the surface. Everyday discernment also influences relationships. It helps people recognize which connections are life-giving and which are draining. This does not mean rejecting people, but understanding boundaries. Discernment guides how much access someone has, how much influence they carry, and how deeply their words are allowed to shape decisions. Without discernment, people may overextend themselves, tolerate harmful dynamics, or confuse loyalty with self-neglect. Discernment is especially important in small, repeated choices. What to listen to, what to watch, what to keep in one's space, how to speak in moments of tension. These choices rarely feel significant, yet they accumulate. Discernment notices patterns before consequences appear. It recognizes direction before destination. This is why it is so valuable in everyday living. It protects long before damage occurs. Emotional awareness plays a key role in discernment. Emotions themselves are not guides, but they provide information. Discernment listens to emotions without being ruled by them. It recognizes when excitement masks distraction or when familiarity hides discomfort. By acknowledging emotional responses honestly, discernment separates signal from noise. Discernment is not about perfection. It does not eliminate mistakes. It simply reduces avoidable ones. When mistakes happen, discernment helps people learn rather than repeat. It fosters growth instead of shame. It encourages adjustment instead of denial. Over time, this creates resilience and confidence, not rigidity. In everyday living, discernment restores agency. People stop drifting and start choosing. Life becomes less reactive and more intentional. Decisions feel grounded rather than pressured. Even when outcomes are uncertain, there is peace in knowing choices were made with clarity rather than impulse. Discernment also deepens peace because it aligns inner values with outer actions. When choices reflect true priorities, inner conflict decreases. Energy is no longer wasted justifying decisions that feel wrong. Instead, there is coherence between belief and behavior. This coherence strengthens confidence and stability. Ultimately, spiritual discernment in everyday living is about attentiveness to what shapes the heart and mind over time. It is not dramatic, but it is powerful. It operates quietly in moments that seem ordinary, guiding direction long before results appear. When cultivated, it becomes a steady companion, helping people navigate complexity with calmness and simplicity, protecting what matters most not through force, but through clarity, awareness, and consistent choice. Restoring holiness without fear or superstition begins with understanding that holiness is not a mood created by anxiety, nor a fragile state that collapses at the slightest mistake. True holiness is not sustained by constant vigilance driven by fear, but by alignment, intention, and clarity. When fear dominates the pursuit of holiness, people become reactive rather than grounded. They begin to see danger everywhere, overcorrect small issues, and live with a sense of tension that contradicts the peace holiness is meant to bring. Restoration that flows from fear may change appearances, but it rarely transforms the heart or the environment in a lasting way. Fear-based approaches often arise from misunderstanding influence and authority. When people believe that holiness must be defended aggressively, they assume they are vulnerable and powerless. This mindset creates anxiety and superstition, where objects, symbols, or situations are feared rather than discerned. Superstition attributes excessive power to external things, while fear exaggerates their impact. Both weaken clarity. Restoration rooted in clarity, however, recognizes that authority does not come from panic, but from order. What does not belong loses influence when it is calmly removed, not when it is feared. Holiness restored through calm intention feels different from holiness enforced through anxiety. Calm restoration brings lightness, relief, and peace. Fear-driven restoration brings rigidity, stress, and hypervigilance. The difference lies in motivation. When motivation is fear, actions are rushed and inconsistent. When motivation is alignment, Actions are thoughtful and steady. Alignment does not require dramatic gestures. It requires honest evaluation and deliberate choice. Superstition often fills the gap when understanding is missing. When people do not fully understand why something feels wrong, they may assign exaggerated meanings or mystical fears to it. This can lead to extremes, where harmless things are treated as threats and genuine issues are overlooked. Restoring holiness without superstition means grounding decisions in values rather than fear responses. It means asking whether something aligns with peace, clarity, and integrity, not whether it triggers anxiety or social pressure. Another challenge is confusing holiness with perfection. When holiness is equated with flawlessness, people either become harsh with themselves and others or give up entirely. Restoration then feels impossible. True restoration recognizes process. It understands that removing what does not belong is not an admission of failure, but an act of growth. Fear disappears when people realize that holiness is strengthened by honesty, not threatened by imperfection. Restoring holiness without fear also involves trust in stability. Holiness does not need constant reinforcement through rituals performed out of panic. It is reinforced through consistency. When environments are aligned with values day after day, they naturally reflect order and peace. Fear-based practices often spike during moments of stress and disappear when life feels calm. Value-based restoration remains steady regardless of circumstances. Language plays a significant role in this process. Fear-driven language emphasizes danger, threat, and urgency. It focuses on what must be avoided rather than what should be cultivated. Restoration-oriented language emphasizes belonging, alignment, and purpose. It focuses on what strengthens life rather than what merely removes risk. The tone of restoration matters because environments respond to tone as much as to action. Restoring holiness without superstition also protects relationships. Fear-based approaches often lead to control, suspicion, and division. People begin policing one another rather than supporting one another. This creates tension and resentment, undermining the very peace holiness is meant to establish. Calm restoration invites cooperation rather than compliance. It encourages shared responsibility instead of imposed rules. Another important aspect is understanding influence proportionately. Not everything carries equal weight. Superstition magnifies minor influences and distracts from major ones. For example, people may fixate on objects while ignoring persistent attitudes like resentment, dishonesty, or contempt. Restoring holiness wisely addresses the most influential factors first. It prioritizes what shapes behavior and atmosphere consistently rather than reacting to surface-level concerns. Holiness restored without fear also fosters resilience. When people are not afraid of losing alignment at every step, they recover more quickly from mistakes. They adjust rather than panic. They correct rather than condemn. This resilience strengthens the environment because it prevents cycles of guilt and anxiety from taking root. An environment that allows for correction without fear remains healthy and stable. Intentionality is the foundation of this approach. When people intentionally choose what belongs and what does not, they do not need fear to motivate them. Decision replaces anxiety. Clarity replaces superstition. Once a decision is made calmly, it does not need to be revisited repeatedly. This steadiness creates a sense of security that fear-based methods cannot achieve. Restoring holiness without fear also invites peace to lead rather than follow. Fear assumes peace will arrive once every threat is eliminated. Calm restoration understands that peace is established through order and maintained through consistency. Peace does not wait for perfection. It grows where alignment is practiced faithfully, even amid ongoing growth. When fear is removed from the process, restoration becomes sustainable. People do not burn out or rebel against standards they understand and value. Instead, they internalize those standards. Holiness becomes part of identity rather than an external pressure. This internalization is what allows environments to remain aligned even when external conditions change. Ultimately, restoring holiness without fear or superstition is about maturity. It reflects confidence rather than insecurity. It trusts that clarity is stronger than anxiety and that alignment is more powerful than panic. When people operate from this understanding, their actions become measured, their environments become stable, and peace becomes a natural outcome rather than a fragile achievement that must be constantly defended. Light, as a conscious choice, not an accident, reshapes how people understand peace, clarity, and transformation within their lives and homes. Many assume light naturally appears when circumstances improve, when problems disappear, or when time passes. This belief quietly removes responsibility and places hope in chance. Yet light does not arrive randomly. It responds to intention. It settles where it is welcomed, maintained, and protected. When people wait for light to appear on its own, they often wait far longer than necessary, mistaking endurance for progress and survival for growth. Choosing light begins with awareness. Darkness is rarely dramatic at first. It often appears as distraction, neglect, or resignation. Light, in contrast, begins with small, deliberate decisions that feel ordinary but carry lasting influence. Choosing light means deciding how a space will be used, how words will be spoken, how time will be spent, and how values will be lived. These choices do not depend on mood or convenience. They depend on clarity. It does not force itself into spaces where it is unwanted or ignored. This is why environments can remain heavy even when people desire peace. Desire without decision does not change atmosphere. Light responds to action, not intention alone. Turning on a light in a dark room is a conscious act. Without that act, darkness remains, not because it is powerful, but because it is uninterrupted. In the same way, choosing light in daily life interrupts patterns that would otherwise continue unchecked. Many people confuse light with positivity. Positivity avoids discomfort and focuses on appearance. Light, however, reveals. It brings clarity even when clarity is uncomfortable. Choosing light means choosing honesty over denial, order over chaos, and responsibility over excuse. It means allowing what is hidden to be seen so it can be addressed. This is why light is sometimes resisted. It requires courage. Darkness feels safer because it hides inconsistencies and delays accountability. Light as a conscious choice also means consistency. Occasional moments of awareness cannot overcome habitual neglect. Light grows stronger where it is maintained. A space that is regularly cleaned stays clean. A relationship that is regularly nurtured stays healthy. A mind that is regularly disciplined stays clear. These outcomes are not accidental. They are the result of repeated choices. Light does not need intensity, it needs persistence. Another aspect of choosing light is removing what blocks it. Light cannot fill a space crowded with clutter. Emotional clutter, mental clutter, and environmental clutter all compete with clarity. Choosing light often requires letting go. Letting go of habits that drain energy. Letting go of objects that distract focus.